The event's been broadcast to alumni who've registered from all over Australia, but also from countries as far afield as Norway and India, the USA and Singapore. So that's fantastic. And so welcome to all of you. Griffith University greatly values its relationships with its alumni. And in addition to participation in events such as these, there are lots of opportunities on offer for you as we continue to be part of each other's future. Being an alumnus of Griffith gives you access to a range of benefits, services and educational opportunities, many of which you might have seen on the rolling slideshow earlier tonight. As an example of that, earlier this year we launched an online alumni peer mentoring program. And it's a dual stream program with the traditional one-to-one peer mentoring relationship, but there's also what we're using, or what we're calling mentoring communities, where people can kind of crowdsource a mentor based on a topic. So it's a bit different to traditional mentoring, and it's been really popular. So there's around 180 people joined that program so far. And there are also lots of opportunities for alumni to be involved in the future development and growth of the university. Volunteering time, for example, to mentor students and each other, supporting students through work placements and through donations, providing feedback on strategy, programs to the university, and generally being ambassadors for the university as you go about your daily lives. The other thing I'd encourage you to think about tonight is consider getting involved through donations to our annual appeal. Alumni can really make a difference in the life of current students who are doing it tough when they make donations through annual appeal, and because donations there are pooled, and donations, no matter how big or small, make a real difference when they're combined with those of others. You can find information on how to do that with some of the information that's on the table in the room tonight or on our website. So that's a little bit about alumni from the Griffith perspective, but tonight's event, and you can probably tell from your name tags and from the marketing, is a joint initiative of the Griffith University alumni team and of the Golden Key International Honour Society. And so I'm delighted to introduce to you now Bren Domingo, who is the Vice President of the Gold Coast chapter of the Golden Key International Honour Society, to tell you a little bit about their work. Bren.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. So I'm Bren Domingo, and I'm currently the Vice President of Golden Key International Honor Society here in the Gold Coast. This morning, I have received confirmation that I have completed all my subjects to be eligible to graduate, so, right? Yay! That's what we've always been waiting for, don't we? But honestly, 6 months ago, I didn't even think that that would be possible. And for some people in this room, they actually know my story. It also means that this morning, I've just finished writing this speech, leaving it last minute. So forgive me because I don't usually write speeches. And if you ask me to design a logo, I can probably give it to you in about 5 minutes. But words are, unfortunately, does not come easily. Honestly, and for everyone who knows me, I kind of just say yes to everything. So when Kim emailed me if I can do the introduction tonight, I just said yes. I'll tell you why. So I'm an international student, and my whole family is back in the Philippines. Because of that, I realized that somehow someone will hopefully take a picture of me or video me while I'm here at this stage, and I'll use that picture, brag it to my mom. So I guess social media for me is a little bit more personal because I have used this tool to reach out to them and update them about my journey here in Australia, and it allows my mom not to worry too much about me, and to convince her that I'm not just fooling around. So for the future, somehow, at least for myself, is still unclear. And during my stay here at Griffith, access to social media has helped me not only to connect to my family, but also to express myself, my vision, and my principles. It created opportunities that I could never imagine. And I felt very, very fortunate to be here tonight because, our speaker will talk more about the potentials of these media and how it can bring us together, especially through our advocacies. So I wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors. I'm very, very glad to have met you tonight. And we hope that this event will inspire you not to be afraid to do more. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Bren. It might have been last minute, but it was still perfectly good. And as the mother of a university student about to go on exchange overseas, I'm going to be using a lot of social media tracking of what she's up to. So for tonight's event, we're focusing on the topic of behavioural marketing, how to become a change agent. And shortly we'll hear from Dr. Timo Dietrich on this topic. And after that, we will open the floor to questions, and we'll have some microphones around the room for that too. For our live streaming audience, you will be seeing two options on your screens. There's a chat functionality to be used for general conversation, and there's a Q&A functionality where you can type questions that you might have for Timo. There'll be plenty of opportunity to ask those questions at the end, so please start to think as we go through this evening of the kind of things you might want to ask. But for now, it's time to meet Dr. Timo Dietrich, who, in addition to being a fellow Griffith alumnus, is the Deputy Director Engagement at Social Marketing at Griffith. Timo is a digital and social marketing expert who uses a suite of behavioural theories, tools and tactics to engage and move users from awareness to action. To share with you a little bit about how he does that, please welcome Dr. Timo Dietrich.
Thank you, Joanne. Appreciate it. Lovely. I was just sending Bren a picture that I just took, and I use that as an adrenaline rush to get really excited for this session. So very glad to be here, and I hope that the next slide is actually about me. Fantastic. I don't really have to say anything about me, which I always like if I get a lovely introduction. And we can straight jump into today's topic, and we're going to talk a little bit about behavior change. I literally cannot see anyone. I hope I won't fall off this stage. It is so bright up here. So I have a little bit of a thought-provoking title here. Whether that's really true or not, you can answer that hopefully at the end of this session today. But before I start, I would love to ask one audience member, perhaps you. What's your name? Sam. Sam, can you remind me at the end just to take a selfie with the crowd? I always am encouraged to take at least one picture when I do a speaking event, and I didn't want to do it at the start because at the moment you're trying to really have a look at me and you think, well, is this guy going to keep me engaged or not for the next 45 minutes? So I figured hopefully I can achieve that, and by the end you will be more excited to take a selfie with me. If not, you're welcome to leave, obviously, at the end of that session. And that will be a clear message that I then have received. All right, so you nudge me at the end when I get to my final slide so that I don't forget. Is that okay? Just sort of wave to me, please. Already forgot your name. What was your name again? Sam, that's it, Sam. All right, fantastic. So I wanted to ask you, because when we talk about change and behavior change specifically, it means something very different for all kinds of individuals. When you were here in this session, what motivated you to come apart from the drinks when you saw the title, perhaps? Can anyone share with me, perhaps that's sitting here in the audience? I know we have a few people online as well, so feel free to change with me, perhaps what you personally want to change, or what you might want to change on an organizational level, or what change means generally for you. And don't be shy, we don't really have time to spend too much on this.
Hi.
Sorry?
Hi.
Pain.
Hi.
Pain. Change is pain. Yes, absolutely, 100%. True. And anyone else? Is that a hand or just styling the hair? Yeah?
Climate change? Climate change?
Climate change, absolutely. One of the biggest problems that we have to solve as humanity. Anyone else? No?
Educate and change perceptions.
Change perceptions, yeah. So the reason why I wanted to sort of ask you is just to get you to think about, perhaps as you listen to me talk about behavior change and change as a whole, to sort of think about what personally potentially that means to you, or what that means within the organization that you're working in, or from whatever other perspective you want to look at it. So the agenda for today is really to talk a little bit about the science of behavior change, then talk about how we do it in our research center, where we are running multiple campaigns and projects across environmental issues, social issues, health issues, all with the aim to drive change and achieve change that essentially helps society and our planet to live a better life. And then at the end, I want to take some action, and I hopefully can inspire you to do so along with me. All right, so let's start with something really depressing. For those of you that have heard of Daniel Kahneman, he's a Nobel Prize winner, and he's pretty much spent his entire lifetime trying to figure out why people make choices. And so decision-making and judgment, that's what he sort of studied throughout his lifetime. And he was recently featured on a podcast, and this guy is pretty old at this day and age, but he sort of said this: I think changing behavior is extremely difficult. Anybody who is very optimistic about changing behavior is just deluded. It's hard to change other people's behavior. It's very hard to change your own, not simple. So, one way to bring everyone down, I thought, good way to start. Doesn't really encourage anyone when you read that message, because you think, man, this guy won a Nobel Prize and he really understands the human mind. Why would he say something like that? Well, I think a lot has to do with the fact that we spend very little of our existence actually sort of in that conscious state of mind, and a lot of our actual functions are subconscious or even unconscious. And the fact when you look at the research that Kahneman has done, he simply sort of alluded to the fact that we are not really in charge of a lot of the things that we end up doing. We like to be, but we're not really. So unfortunately, that is sort of the reality, and we call that the iceberg syndrome in the brain, where we try to get a lot of conscious existence throughout our lifetime, but we're really struggling to actually make it happen. So that's why, from a research perspective, I say it's great to engage our potential target audience and ask them questions and sort of want to understand why they're behaving the way they're behaving, but fundamentally they will always give us an answer. Our subconscious mind is great at producing answers, but whether that answer is actually the truth, we often don't know ourselves. But we'll have an answer and it'll come out some way or another. So often it's great if we actually spend more time watching what people do. And when we watch them, we learn why they behave the way they behave. So as we talk about this science of behavior change, I want you to think about the fact that there's usually a bit of a continuum. And either you have a simple behavior change context or something that's really complex. So simple could be something that's just one-off, something that's really fairly easy to do, and you're gonna feel an immediate success or reward. So I might get you to sign up for a retirement plan. You might say, well, the payout is going to be really late. Yes, but I might make you feel really good about that. So, and it's a one-off thing, and then it's a set and forget. So that would be classified as a very simple behavior. Whereas if I go over to the complex side, that might be, a challenge to lose 50 kilos or 20 kilos. And that's a hard journey. And it requires multiple behaviors over a continuous period of time. So you have to ask yourself, if you think about yourself or you're thinking about changing people within your organization, where and what are you trying to achieve? Where do you sit on this spectrum, right? So again, I want you to think about, well, if you are perhaps now sort of entertaining the idea of changing something or something that you've always been wanting to change, where would that fall? Would that fall into the simple or the complex category? I guarantee you often we're actually somewhere more in the complex change space. We want to change something really big. And we set the benchmark up here, and we're essentially already setting ourselves up for failure because it's really not easy to tackle these complex problems. So the first rule really is to make behavior change fun. Make it easy. Make it popular, and also make it time-bound. Because if I tell you to do it until you die, the chances of you actually doing that will, be more unrealistic. But the goal ultimately is to form a habit that you don't think about anymore, that you will then continue to do for the rest of your life. And we have many of those, such as brushing our teeth, for example, right? Parents taught us that from an early age, and we just do it. Well, hopefully, I think we all do it. So whilst we have these ideas around making things fun, easy, popular, social, and it doesn't matter sort of what frameworks you use, these things keep popping up. But when you then look at a lot of the actual behavior change campaigns that are being conducted, it often goes back to education. If I go to people and say, what should we be doing when it comes to getting people to be more physically active, they say, well, you know, provide them with the information and just go and once you have given them the information, they will be doing that. Well, that's mostly not the case. We tend to spend a lot of time and money and energy on building education campaigns, but unfortunately they don't work for the majority of the population. In fact, if we look at the scientific evidence base, we know that they only work in about 8% of all cases. So I always ask, well, what about the other 92% of people that we're not changing? And then the answer often goes towards, well, we just need the stick, you know? We just need the law and some good fines and policies and, in place in order to make sure that people behave the way we want them to behave. Australia is really good at that, always tells you not to do anything wherever you go. And as a German, you know, coming from the Autobahn and then starting to drive in Australia, I paid my share of fines. Still very close to losing my license, a separate topic. But the point is with the law, see, I'm from Germany originally, and we have obviously a massive amount of people that have fled war zones and that have found shelter in my home country. About, you know, 2 million people within 5 years. And we are not ready for that. We have all this bureaucracy and, you know, we think like, oh, well, if we just prohibit people selling merchandise to tourists on the street, then that's going to work. But it's not. You have police trying to enforce it, but it's not working because these people are depending on making money and sending money back home. And we're just not giving them an infrastructure, an environment where these people are actually allowed to work quickly. So we're not set up for it. So my point here is that we can have all the laws in the world, but they don't get all the people to act the way we want them to act. So we speak about this behavior change Trinity. And this Trinity is really made up of 3 parts. Education, like I said, for those people that really just want to do the right thing, right? Just show it to me, give me the information, I go and I do it. On the other end of the spectrum, we got the laggards, the people that we got to force to do the right thing, right? So I'm saying that law and education make a lot of sense, but there's a large chunk of the population, in many cases, you know, more than 80% of people, where we really just have to give them better support. Build the right environment, nudge them the right way, help them to make the right choices because they want to do the right thing, but often they don't have the right resources in place. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to talk about a little bit how we do it in our research center. And I want to showcase to you how we actually apply this social marketing thing to change human behavior for the better. And I wanted to sort of kick off with a little bit of a teaser clip to show you what's possible if we move away from the law and the education bit to a bit more of the middle bit that definitely includes fun. you go. The conference organizing committee, when I tested this video, were very concerned that we were talking about sex this evening. But I think it's always very appropriate, you know, it's part of society. So how do we arrive at a solution like that? Well, this discipline called social marketing, it seeks to develop and integrate marketing concepts with other approaches to influence behaviors that benefit individuals and communities for the greater social good. A definition is always nice, but what does it really mean? Well, that's exactly what I want to step you through this middle bit of this presentation today, before I bring it back to you as an individual, but to showcase really what goes into creating campaigns such as the one you've just seen, and how do we arrive actually at those types of solutions. So throughout the years where we have been involved with a lot of different and unique behavioral challenges, you know, as a German, I've always been obsessed with processes, but the problem is if you look at a lot of the scientific literature, it becomes very difficult to understand, well, where do we start, where do we finish, and how do we actually execute a proper behavior change campaign? So with the team, we have worked a long time to build the CBE process, which essentially stands for co-creation, building, and engaging. And those 3 steps have 8 fundamental principles within them, these social marketing principles that we apply. And these principles, where we have been spending numerous years on running systematic literature reviews, and I'm not trying to get too academic here, but I just want to make a point that we actually consulted the evidence base, and we figured out that if you use more of these principles, more of these 8 things, you achieve more behavior change with the people you're seeking to change, right? So now in this process model, I want to sort of step you through what that actually means and how we do it. All right? So it's a bit of a mix between theory and practice, so stick with me. This is essentially just an overview of how these 8 principles integrate into the process, and I should flag that some of those principles will also reappear at other stages depending on the type of work you would be doing. So first, let's think about principle number 1, stakeholder orientation. I always say that everything has to be people-centered, and we need to think of those people we are seeking to serve and we are seeking to change. But with that obsession, I think people often forget that there's a limit to how much insight you can get from the people you're working with. So we have to think a little bit more broadly in terms of who are our stakeholders that have a vested interest. Sometimes we're so solution-focused that we forget to actually think about, well, is the problem that, for example, our funding partner has brought forward, or that we think is the problem, is that really the problem? So are we open enough at the start to reevaluate potentially what the behavior change goal should be in the first place, rather than thinking that we have all the answers, right? And then thinking about who is going to be part of that journey. Because all those, and this is not an all-inclusive list, but all those stakeholders have potentially a role to play, and we need to bring them all along that journey, because otherwise we will lose people along the way. I put the people at the heart because often from a marketing perspective, I mean, that is very evident and clear, but often otherwise I see that we forget to speak to those that we seek to serve. And that obviously is a problem, because that creates more education campaigns or more fines rather than helpful solutions that push the majority of the population into the right direction. Step 2, competition. It's about figuring out what's already out there. So with my team, when we actually get thrown into the deep end of a behavioral challenge, one was, can you help us save the koala population in the Redland City Council area? And we said, sure. So one of the things we did first was to actually look at, well, what had been done so far? And as we sort of conducted this systematic literature review, we found all these different, very unique, koala heavily focused campaigns or programs that had already been conducted. Interestingly enough, when we actually worked with the people in the community, we found that the last thing they wanted was another koala awareness program. But what we did learn was that when we actually co-designed with these folks, with those people from the community, what we did learn was the fact that not just the third most... So let me ask a question. Does anyone know what the number 1 death for koalas is? Roadkill. Number 2? Dogs. Number 3? Yeah, habitat loss, exactly, right? So Obviously, number one, really difficult, right? Particularly in a sort of urban environment. Roads, number two, or car crashes, car accidents is another one. But that wasn't the one we were actually going to tackle. We actually focused on the dog owners in that community and started to work with them to build a dog training program, which actually didn't talk about koala protection at all. But it had this little koala aversion program within it. But the point here is for us to actually look at, well, what's already out there, A, did it work, but then also use these things sometimes to bring them back to the people and to have an assessment whether this is actually a solution that they would want in the first place. Theory. That's probably the one that for a practitioner always sounds terribly daunting because you say, theory, oof, what to do with that? Well, theory has a role and a place. Whether we use that to design programs, evaluate programs, theory is really important. And I'm just sharing one here which I find extremely valuable for us to also understand the complex interplay between an individual and the environment that that individual lives within. It also gives us an insight whether we need to sort of pull the levers more at the individual level or whether we really need to think about that environment that people live within, right? Because if you're born into a lower socio-demographic environment, for example, and I tell you to go and cook healthy meals, but you have zero access to any of those proper supermarkets and just corner stores with processed foods, it becomes way more challenging. So then it wouldn't be fair to sort of just focus on the individual, but it probably made more sense to focus on the environment and drive change within there. Segmentation. It's very common for any commercial operator to really think about who their end user is and figure out who that is. But even on the commercial front, we don't spend enough time actually figuring out who our audience is. And less so we do that when it comes to social change. We just think, well, I don't want to stigmatize anyone, so best if I just create something that fits everyone, and then obviously we don't reach anyone.
Well, it's true that I fart, but I wouldn't call myself a farter. I'm a social farter. I really only do it when I'm out with my friends that fart. We hang out, we drink, we dance, just have some fun being together. Farting. Sometimes I'll use farting as an excuse to meet a guy. Do you want to go outside for a fart? Yeah. We talk. We fart. Just because I fart at parties now and then, it doesn't make me a farter.
It just doesn't get old. I've seen it a few times now, but I want to ask you a question. So what are the initial impressions? I obviously hear a bit of laughter. Do you like it? Can I get a show? Who likes it? Show of hands, who likes it? Yeah. Anyone who doesn't like it? Yeah? For those of you that didn't like it, any reason why? Do you want to share it loud and clear?
Made me uncomfortable.
Made you uncomfortable? Yeah.
Disgusting.
Disgusting?
Social acceptable.
It's not socially acceptable. Yeah.
I didn't think the analogy rang true. I feel like something like that would stick out a lot more at a party than smoking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's very interesting. Mostly, it's fun, right? And I said to you, make behavior change fun. But there's more than fun that we have to bring, obviously, to a good behavior change program. And the issue here is obviously that for anyone that doesn't smoke, this is pretty entertaining, right? Despite the awkwardness that it initially creates within you as you're watching this. But it's also a natural, human character trait, like we all know it. But the point here really is the fact that in this ad, if you go and show that to a person that smokes, what do you think they feel? Challenged? Shame? Sure? Funny for the smoker?
Probably disbelief.
So the ones defensive. So the ones that I've showed it to, probably more anger, just don't find it funny at all, and usually tune out quite quickly. Because it's ridiculous. And it's not what smoking is for them. So when you think about a good brand, if you think about a good beer commercial, and the association they're trying to form, right? Think about Australia Day, and think about, 4X, and mates getting together around a campfire. Like, you're there with your mates, you're having a good time, and beer is part of that. Like, I'm attaching my behavior, drinking beer, with the value of mateship. What am I doing here? I want you to not smoke, but I'm giving you zero value why you should be doing that. So when we think about segmentation, I always say, whether this is in a commercial space or in a social space, forget what you think is right. Remove yourself, unless you're trying to change your own behavior, because then I want you to understand yourself better. But the idea really here is to figure out, how do we build personas where we have a true insight into what drives people? What is their value? What do they care about? And how can I attach my message to that? How can I link that? How can I make that connection? Commercial brands do this so well, but for some reason in the public health space, for example, or health promotion space, social change space, whatever you want to call it, we don't do it as well. But we have to. So we're wasting too much money with fear campaigns or campaigns that are funny but are not cutting through. If I do these 4 principles, I arrive at an insight. So every time we do these 4 steps that can take different amounts of time, we need to arrive at an insight that helps us to move from that co-creation stage into that build stage. Figuring out what it is that is now at the core of what we're trying to achieve that will help us drive a solution that engages the people we seek to serve. So what that insight could be, we always have to be open-minded. And I like not knowing what the solution is. And I like going in with that open mind, because as a good marketer, that's exactly what you need to do. So I want to give you an insight from one of our programs. And this is an alcohol program we created for one of our funding partners. And they said to us, well, we need to do something with this whole alcohol education thing. It's just super lame and it's not cutting through. And after we spent a significant amount of time working together, particularly with students and stakeholders, where we arrived at, and this was not endorsed by teachers, by the way, so you can't always listen to all stakeholders along the process, but where we arrived was the fact that this, in its first place, needs to be engaging. If we're not engaging, the students, those teenagers, will not associate or resonate with any of those messages that we're going to put in front of them. It also must be fun. It needs to be a break to the routine. And anything that we actually convey to them has to be relevant. It can't be unrealistic. You can't go into a school and practice or preach abstinence if about 60% of the cohort are drinking. You already lost 60% by the time you start talking to them. We use those insights then to build programs that cut through. Programs that resonate with people. Programs that actually people might even be willing to pay for because they give so much value. Just like when you buy that Coca-Cola can and you're willing to pay money, we need to create programs that people are willing to pay for. So in this case, just to run with the Blurred Minds program, well, how did we use those insights and what did we build? So I always flagged it as this gamification of alcohol education, building a program that was just fun, interactive, had 5 punchy lessons, 6 online games, 6 offline games, virtual reality house party, and then obviously relevant messaging that tied along and with those specific type of activities and games that we did bring into the classroom. From there, we move into exchange. So we built a solution, and we obviously need to bring the solution to the people we seek to serve. Now, with this project, Blurred Minds, it's a bit tricky because I need to get by the gatekeepers. I have schools to please, I have teachers to please, so I got to make sure that I get by those. And so there's essentially 2 audiences that we have to please. But when you think about exchange, I just want you to think about it for a moment from the perspective of Coca-Cola, and I already got you to think about this a little bit. But Coca-Cola is not selling you, profit return on investment or sales. It's selling you happiness in a can, and that's what they've been doing for, more than 100 years, extremely effectively. See, in the health space, in the change space, we often do it wrong. We don't focus on the customer gains. We often actually focus on really boring, lame facts that no one wants to buy into. Where is the dream that we're selling? Where's the happiness that we are selling? And how are we attaching that to the values of the people we are serving? So what's in it for me? When you think about engagement, it's also about putting it in front of as many people as you obviously can. So in the context of this project, we visited more than 50 schools, 4,500 kids, lots of page visits with all the online games we obviously have, 10,000s of gameplays, many teacher kit downloads. So it's not just us delivering the program, but teachers actually accessing those resources and implementing them at their own time in the classroom. And then from there, with the media attention we created, we reached an additional 1.8 million people to those students. Ideally, if we move through all these principles and we move through these 3 steps of the CBE process, we get to something that we want to, ultimately always achieve, and that is behavior change. And I have to flag, though, that behavior change is the long-term goal. And sometimes we also have to be happy if we can, for example, just increase knowledge a little bit, or if we are able to change perhaps a belief or an attitude. It is not always behavior change, particularly when it is complex, right? Sometimes we have to celebrate the smaller wins along the way. And if you think about this alcohol program, well, ideally, I want those kids that are not drinking to continue not to drink. I want those that are drinking excessively at the age of 15 to reduce their drinking. And the ones that are maybe drinking a little bit, well, ideally, they either keep it at that level or they stop. So I gotta celebrate the wins here and think about what is a critical and essential element that I should be measuring on my behavior change journey. So, on that note, Seth Godin recently wrote this little piece, and I thought it was very appropriate to, think about what Daniel Kahneman said at the start a little bit differently. See, he said people don't change unless they want to. So our job as really good marketers is to create that want, to create that desire. Because then that means we have done our job right. And we think about it a little bit more positively than Daniel Kahneman when he sort of answered that question briefly on behavior change. And he talked for a long time on that podcast. I think that was his only wisdom on behavior change. But having said that, I think this is really the core mission. So how to bring that back to your own personal life? And I'm sure everyone in this audience at some point is interested in creating change, whatever that may be. So given I've asked you a couple of times throughout the session, I want to now put it back to you. Is there something that you are trying to change? Is there something that you want to do differently, perhaps either for the rest of your life or for 365 days or just for a month? Is there something? And if that is the case, what could that be? So just take about 15 seconds to think about that. Just give that a good moment. And then I want you, if you feel comfortable, share that with the person next to you and vice versa. So I'll give you 15 seconds to just think about it quietly on your own. And then I'm going to get you to talk to each other really briefly. All right, that's 15 seconds. Have a chat to each other for about a minute. Okay. Can I have two people that are willing to share perhaps something with me? That feel comfortable? You, yes?
Yeah, how do I get my next door neighbor to stop doing drugs and stop doing ice?
Well, that will be definitely on the complex behavioral side, I would say. That's not a simple behavior. And that is obviously not specifically you, but that is thinking of somebody else. So we have a bit more homework to do with that individual. Can we address that question towards the end?
We can do a whole study on it.
I know. Do you want to hear an interesting fact?
Shoot.
All right. Because we talk about that to the kids, because there's this ice epidemic that we have, right? And we think that there's a large number of Australians that will be consuming ice or methamphetamines. You want to take a guess how many people of the Australian population consume it?
Actually, I spoke to an AFP detective, and he said that from his analysis and research, there is not a single street in Australia that hasn't been affected by ice in one shape, form, or another.
And the problem with police is, because they're obviously the law enforcement, that's all they see day in, day out. So they don't spend time with the people that don't consume it, and that's why they always have a very inflated perception of any type of problem behavior, whether that's drug use or any type of other illegal activity. But in fact, the numbers are really low. When you think of the 25 million people that live in Australia, it's about 2%. Obviously, there's a number of people that wouldn't be disclosing that type of behavior as well, so we might say that's a little bit higher than that number that has been reported, but that's certainly one of those very complex behaviors. Now, I'm going to come back to that, and probably more on a one-to-one basis, because it's a very serious one, and I have some thoughts around it, but definitely not the one that I want to entertain the entire crowd with. Look, anyone that has something that they're individually interested in doing?
My husband says he's quitting
Quitting drinking?
Tomorrow.
Right, tomorrow, yes. And that's obviously not your goal. Yeah. What about yourself?
I'm thinking of changing my career.
And where do we place that on the spectrum of simple to complex? Complex? Yeah? Is it something that's you're very motivated to do? Yeah. Is it something that's from an ability perspective, when you think about the options that you have, is it possible? Like, do you have lots of options available? Do you have lots of employers that you're thinking of?
No, I have to further study and
So it's a big long-term move. Thank you. Because the reason why I asked this is when we think back to the work I shared with you and the CBE process, that is how we, on a larger scale, think about behavior change and how we run through a change program that we then essentially create, right? That takes time, that takes effort, it's a big team. But individually, sometimes people say, but well, what should I be doing and how can I do it? I love BJ Fogg's work on that note because he's able to give a very simple framework that can work for anyone as you're thinking about change, whether it's complex or whether it's obviously more simple. Because what he says is essentially there's three elements that need to come together. First off, we need to have at least some type of motivation. Whether that's high or low, it depends what the behavior actually is, right? And the other bit is the ability. And ability can be your personal skill set that you need to upskill or further your studies, for example, or it could also be just an assessment of your environment. And for example, if you come to the realization that you don't want to live next to a person that's consuming drugs all the time, and let's say you're not particularly interested in the life of that individual, just making some general assumptions here, then maybe actually relocating would be the easiest fix if you're not invested in living in that specific community, in that specific house. And I don't know those personal circumstances. But ability can be your environmental factors that you're dealing with, and then obviously your personal ability. And then the third bit is the trigger, something that actually gets you to do what you need to do, something that triggers you to make that change. So BJ Fogg, he has a beautiful TED Talk, 18 minutes, and he talks about a tiny habit. And so he wanted to get physically fit. Well, at least a bit fitter than he was. And he said, all right, I'm motivated to do that. I have high motivation. What could I do? Well, how about some push-ups? All right, push-ups. Yes, ability, tick, I can do that. And then he said, I'm also not going to do 30, 40, 50 push-ups because, well, then I might not be so able and maybe also less motivated. So he sort of settled for, I think he started with 3 and increased it gradually over to 10. But here's the kicker. He needed a trigger because whilst you have the ability and the motivation, still doesn't mean that you will actually do it. So ideally, you tie it to an existing behavior that you already have in place. You want to take a guess what that was that he tied, the behavior that he tied it to? Peeing. So every time he would go and visit the bathroom, he actually would then get down and do 3 push-ups and increase that over time. And that is how he implemented that little habit. So I guess I want to encourage you to think about, on the personal change journey, to think about, well, what is it that I do want to do, if there is something, and then keep those 3 points in mind. Now, depending on the complexity of your problem, this gentleman also created this behavior grid that you can see over here. And I put the link on this slide, so if you wanted to take a picture, but it actually caters for the fact whether your behavior change challenge is more simple or more complex. Do you need to stop something? Are you starting something? Do you need to do this continuously? And then it gives you specific tips for what you need to do when it comes to your ability, your motivation, and the trigger that you should be setting. And it's also very neat to consider that if you are trying to think about changing someone else. And you can do a little bit of investigative research in terms of what you're trying to get them to do, and then actually click through this specific matrix, and I'll spit out a scenario for you with a list of recommendations. I think it's a really funky and fun tool. So we ran a conference last week. It was called Change 2019, and we launched Change in 2018 for the first time, and actually brings together a community of change agents. People sharing amazing stories about how they're making more change happen. So we had an intimate setting at South Bank, about 160 change agents, working across all kinds of challenges. And what we do a lot is think about, obviously, how we are influencing change and how we're driving change. And so we thought it would be good if we give delegates the opportunity to also join a little tribe, a little movement for the next 365 days to commit a small behavior that they felt competent and able and motivated to do, and join us in that quest, in that journey, to do a little thing and achieve a bigger change together, whatever that may be. And I have a 2-year-old boy and a tomorrow 4-week-old little baby girl, and I said, in order to pick something that I can actually manage, I need to be really realistic with myself. And I went for a 1-minute meditation. I've always wanted to meditate. I'm not particularly good at it. I keep being told from one of my PhD students who is really into it that I need to be doing that more. And I said, all right, I'm going to commit to that. And so I invite you to jump onto that little landing page, put your email address into it. We'll kick this off, and you essentially will receive, we won't be spamming you. We will just have you join a little movement and commit to a little thing to make the world a better place. Whatever that may be for you, if you wish. And obviously, I make behavior change voluntary, so I would never force anyone to do it. So I'm just one of 40 very passionate change agents in our center. And like I said, we work across social, health, and environmental challenges. And I gave you a little bit of a sneak peek in terms of how we do that. We obviously spend a fair bit of time also running our own events. So we have free lunch and learn events, all of them actually running in 2020, and these are in South Bank. So if you have some time, feel free to come along, check out the events we have lined up, and we also run a set of master classes where we actually take a bit of a deep dive into some of these respective methodologies and tools that I've been mentioning throughout my talk today. And obviously, if you're keen to join us for Change and the Change Conference, we are running it in 2020 again. And we already have a few very amazing speakers lined up that, are probably going to be expanded to about 20 that we had this year. So I think we have a little bit of time now for Q&A, whether that's from our crowd that's online and has joined us there for the live webinar, or from anyone here. I can't really see you, but Sam, we have to do one selfie, hopefully, before we start and transition the Q&A. And I would love for you to join me on there. But like I said, if you feel terribly offended and you didn't like what you heard, you're also welcome to skip away from the picture. All right, let's take one selfie together. I should have the camera in the right spot. Can I have you perhaps wave a little bit so that it looks a little bit more exciting? And maybe do your cheers and round of applause right now as well as you do it. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Timo. That's some really interesting insights there on how to motivate people to change, probably leveraging the 97% of our existence that's not conscious. That stat was fascinating for me. Obviously, it seems to me that convincing people they want to change a behaviour and making that change a positive seems to be the key, and probably also the hardest part.
Absolutely.
So we do have some time for some questions. So if anybody has a question they want to ask, if you just pop your hand in the air, and then Jenny over here has the microphone, and we'll bring that over to you. Thanks, Jenny.
Hello there, thank you very much. That was very interesting. My question is in regards to predominantly social media, things like Facebook, and people that are against a factual situation. So, for example, climate change, and there'll be climate change deniers, or vaccines, anti-vaxxers, you've got a whole pile of them basically. How would you approach that? Or would you bother approaching those scenarios to perhaps change or to present a fact? How would you do that, sorry?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I have, I'm not sure if it's wisdom, but you'll get my pragmatic answer. So we talked a little bit, I touched on segmentation, and I talked about thinking about the people you're trying to reach. See, from a public health perspective, probably you're trying to cater for sort of everyone, but from a marketer's perspective, I try to go also for an audience where I have a chance to actually influence their thinking. Those people probably sit at the very far end of a spectrum where those beliefs are fairly firmly held. You live with one? Okay, there you go. So I don't need to tell you. And the problem with social media and digital in general is obviously there's the saying that whatever you put in, you get back 100-fold. So that's probably the biggest threat we're facing at the moment, that people that are on the far end of a spectrum or are very extreme, so to speak, across whatever that may be, they find like-minded individuals, and then they get fed back, unfortunately, from the algorithms across the various social platforms, more of that. And that obviously creates a greater divide between our societal sort of subgroups that we have, more so than ever before, and it's a bit unprecedented. So I always say digital can be a curse and a blessing, because if you're obviously exposing yourself to some pretty awesome content that helps you grow and develop a growth mindset, and you're exposing yourself to all the things that really help you become a better human being, fantastic. But you can also take that all into the wrong direction, and it sort of just comes back at you faster. So it's a challenge. I probably have personally from our work, we would not start with that audience. We would try to go more after the majority that we can move in that same direction, and then later on try to tackle those ones. But probably from that perspective, that's where the whip needs to come out at the very end to convince people. I don't know. That's my answer for you, as best as I can deliver it right now here in front of everyone.
Thank you, Timo. I think we have a question from one of the online people.
We do. Hi, Timo. Question is, how do you measure behaviour change when you know people will tell you before and after what they think you want to hear?
Good question.
Yeah, I live with that obstacle. Good question. I think there's multiple ways to evaluate a program. One is to ask people before and after, and obviously that comes with limitations. There's all kinds of biases that we carry within us, and I obviously started with a beautiful slide telling you all that I can ask you all kinds of questions and you give me awesome answers, but whether that's the fundamental truth is a whole different conversation. We need to move beyond just asking people before and after. So some of our work then looks, for example, at, I guess, more objective measures. So whether we observe people in action, that's one thing. So we could go into a bar and we could change the way we serve drinks, or we could change the way we design the entire environment and observe if it makes a difference to people that are coming to the venue, whether it reduces their drinking, yes or no. So that's one very, I guess, specific way of doing it, where I don't need to rely on the people reporting it back to me. The other option is to actually start to look a little bit more into, well, what's happening in the brain. So we have done this with some social advertisements where we actually started to figure out, well, are people paying attention when we're exposing them to a stimuli? And again, you have to be careful because it's just a partial answer again, and it's not the holy grail and the ultimate truth, but we can use these complementary methodologies to try to get a better insight into human behavior. So if I'm able to measure brain activity and see if you're paying attention or not, if areas of memory and attention are actually firing, so to speak, then I have a better indication whether what you're actually telling me in the survey is the truth or not. So this is an interesting bit, and I'm giving a long-winded answer here, but we looked at this fear-based campaign where there's this horrible crash, somebody has been drinking and driving, kills his girlfriend, and so after the crash happens, after that it's just fear, there's no hope, and after that crash, we actually found that people disengage. So they're not paying attention to the message anymore. So if they were to answer a pre and post survey and they might say this is a great ad, I think this fear thing is the way to go, I could then look at, hey, but we actually did measure what's happening in your brain and we saw that you disengaged, right? So that's an interesting additional insight that helps us to circumvent just relying on people's responses. And then there's obviously many other ways where we can start to look at how people's eyes are moving and where they're paying attention to, in addition to looking into their brain activity.
It's just kind of what they do and how they behave as well as what they say. Is what
Exactly,
yeah.
yes.
Any other questions from the floor?
So just further to that, how would you approach a road safety campaign?
So, I mean, there's many ways to do it. One of my PhD students does actually a systematic literature review on that. There's a lot of work that has been done in the communication space in terms of trying to understand how to construct the most effective campaign. A lot of that is obviously one-size-fits-all approaches, doesn't necessarily test it with the right audiences. So we have to be always careful with the science base, the evidence base that exists, but you can't just do fear, for example. You need to finish a message with some hope. So an emotional roller coaster ride is really good because it keeps people engaged, but you need to make sure it's not too hard-hitting so that people completely disengage, and you need to finish with some type of hope at the end that will create a more effective message than just the hard-hitting stuff that we see often when it comes to ICE campaigns or road safety campaigns.
We have another question from the lady in the blue. Hi.
Hi, Dr. Timo. Thank you for your presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I was just wondering, does Social Marketing and Griffith have any internships available for students?
Love that question. Of course we do, yes. We actually a very young team, and we have about 20 PhD students in our center, and we're always looking for talented folks that wanna join us. So I'd recommend you to grab my card at the end of the talk, and I'll tell you a few more things that you can send me that you can send my way, and then I'll be in touch and we'll set up an appointment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So because we're about to run out of time, and I have a question I want to ask, I'm going to do MC's prerogative and ask my question. You talked during your talk about engaging and listening to your audience to create better campaigns. Are there any occasions when you wouldn't listen to them?
So I had a beautiful experience when I was working on some of those games I shared with you for that alcohol program. And I was working with a very young tech startup, and I had this beautiful debate with them about whether we should engage our end users or not, in this case 15-year-old kids. And I'll never forget what he said. He looked at me and said, you know, Timo, just because people like playing a video game, they don't know how to actually create a good video game. And there's some truth in that, right? But we would have never arrived at the point of creating this gamified solution if we hadn't listened to them, if we hadn't worked with the end users. So I'm a big believer that we should always include people throughout the journey, but there's a point where we should, and there's a limit to what we should expect in return. I'm not a believer that they will just create us the best winning campaign that will, you know, win over everyone and achieve all the desires that we have for our behavior change work. That's definitely, that's too much. You can't expect that. But you can actually get a true sense of what sort of environment people are living in, what their expectations are, what they like, what they don't like. And sometimes they have really unique sort of experiences that they then share with you where you just say, didn't think about that, didn't see that in any published materials, didn't hear that from any expert I actually interviewed, and that's that nugget that you use to then create that campaign. So I'd say you should always, at some point, listen to them.
But not necessarily always follow their advice.
Yes.
Okay, so we've run out of time now, and I just want to say thank you, Timo. Those insights have definitely given us some food for thought. I'm sure you'll agree that we've been really lucky to have Timo with us tonight, and I really hope that you all got some really good takeaways from that. Speaking of food, it's now time to finish the presentation part of the evening and move on to the networking. Timo will be joining us next door in the function room, and I'm sure we'll be happy to continue to have conversations and chat with you. Absolutely. For those of you who've joined us online, we haven't quite worked out the technology to get the food and drink to you yet, so sorry about that one. Finally tonight, to you, alumni of Griffith University, we are very proud of the amazing things that you are doing to make a difference in our world, and I want to thank each of you for being fantastic ambassadors for Griffith University and the diverse and valued work that you do. If you want to know more about the work that we do in alumni engagement or the ways you can continue to be involved with your university, please come and chat with any of the alumni team tonight, or you can get in touch with us anytime. And I do hope your association with us will continue for many years to come. So please enjoy the rest of your evening. Join us next door for some more networking, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks.